Okay, if you remember the basic classification of plants, you remember that we have non-vascular. If you remember what non-vascular means, it means they do not have xylem or phloem, the vascular tissue, and you have vascular plants. And the vascular plants are then further divided into seedless plants. So they're going to use spores, just like these guys will use spores, and these guys will use spores. Spores, spores. And then you have the seed plants, and the seed plants are then further divided into the gymnosperms. Gymnosperms meaning naked seed. These are the cone-bearing plants, and angiosperms. These are the flowering plants, and they have seeds that are contained in an ovary called fruit. These are naked seeds. And so this series of videos are going to be going over the classification. I'm going to start with the non-vascular plants. There's 3 phyla here. And then we're going to move on in a later video to seedless plants, or seedless vascular plants, sorry. And then finally to the seed plants. I believe there's 3 here. I think there's 4 here. This is 1, what is that, 8, and there's 12, which means there's 4 here. So unfortunately, we won't be able to get to the project that I wanted to have you guys do, which is doing a presentation on these plant groups, but well, you know, then life happens, I guess. Anyway, so this video, I just want to talk about the non-vascular plants. So I'm just going to go through the slides because I don't want to just rely on you guys having to read everything all the time without me giving maybe some context or making it a bit easier. So the non-vascular plants, like I said, there's 3 phyla, or 3, if you remember, I don't know if it was last year, I talked about how we classify living things, and the largest classification category is kingdom. So you have the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, fungi, bacteria, like that. And so then the next level down is going to be phylum, and that's what this is. So there's 3 phyla. Together, these 3 phyla are called bryophytes. You don't have to remember how many species of each, but a really, really, really important point is that they do not have, they do not have vascular tissue. The vascular tissue includes the xylem and phloem. They also do not have true roots, stems, or leaves. Well, what do I mean when I say true roots, stems, and leaves? It means that you're going to see that they have things that look like roots, stems, and leaves, but they're not actually roots, stems, and leaves. And the main reason why they are not is because of this. You cannot be a root, stem, or leaf without vascular tissue. So I might refer to things as being root-like, stem-like, or leaf-like, but they are not true roots, stems, or leaves. And because they do not have vascular tissue, specifically xylem, which, if you remember, transports water, they have to grow near a source of water because they're going to have to absorb the water directly through osmosis. Okay, so all 3 of these phyla are the most primitive types of plants. There's one phylum which you'll see that has something very in common with algae. The easiest way to learn all of these phyla is to learn what makes them unique, like some kind of identifying characteristic. And so I'll go and I'll point that out as we go. Of course, they have alternation of generations life cycle, which is the alternating between sporophyte and gametophyte stage, which we talked about, feels like a year ago already. They are seedless and they produce spores. And the last point's particularly important. Because they don't have vascular tissue, they are going to be small plants. Now, they can use either sexual or asexual reproduction depending on the presence of water, excuse me. When water is present, they can reproduce sexually by releasing the egg and the sperm into the water. Actually, sorry, scratch that. That's what animals do. For plants, the egg doesn't get released into the water. The egg stays in a specialized structure called the archegonium, which we'll talk about in a later chapter. But the sperm is released into the water and it has to find the egg. When there is not enough moisture, then they can go to the asexual reproduction, which is using spores. Okay, phylum number 1. Now, keeping in mind that all of these are going to end with the suffix -fata. So the first one is called Bryophyta. Phyta, I think, is Greek for plant. And so this is the phylum which all of them are collectively called bryophytes, but this is specifically the bryophyte phylum. So these are the moss. And you can look at the picture here and see what I'm talking about when I say root-like structure. Those little hairy things coming out of the bottom that look like they're roots, they are not roots. Why? Because they don't have vascular tissue. So they are called root-like structures, and the proper name for them are rhizoids. So they function like roots and they look like roots, but they're not roots. And here's a close-up of them. Again, they look like roots, but they don't have vascular tissue, therefore they are not roots. Here is a very good picture, and I'm going to blow that up so you can see it, of the gametophyte and sporophyte stage all together. So these little tiny things that you see down here, these are the gametophytes. Now, remembering back to when I first talked about alternation of generations, each phylum of plant is going to have a dominant phase, whether it's a gametophyte or sporophyte phase. So for non-vascular plants, the main phase of their life cycle is the gametophyte. And this is a perfect example why, because the main part of the plant down here is a gametophyte. This weird kind of stalk capsule looking thing that's sticking up for it, that's the sporophyte. So you can understand by this picture looking at this picture, you can understand how the sporophyte is the non-dominant phase, because it's literally dependent on the gametophyte for nutrition and water and all of that, because it's like literally growing out of the middle of the gametophyte. Now, for moss, the gametophytes can be male, female, or both. Guess that would make them pangendered. I don't know. Anyway, this is a really good argument for not being so obsessed with gender like some people are in the human species, because in nature, nature doesn't really care. All right, now here's a really important part about moss. Now, if you have ever been to a national park like Khao Yai or anything like that, you might go and you see big rocks and they've got these plants growing out of them. These are really important types of plants, the bryophytes, because they're called pioneer plants. And pioneer basically means to be the first thing there. So when you have an environment where no plants exist, the pioneer plants are the ones that come in and basically literally build the soil that is going to be used by successional species after that. So what happens is the moss actually forms a symbiotic relationship with, I believe it's a fungus, and it's called lichen. Hello, I'll type it in here, L-I-C-H-E-N, lichen. And that's that kind of grayish stuff that you see here, and then there's a bit of moss on top of it. So what they do is they release acids, which erode the rock and release the nutrients. And then when the lichen and the moss, they die, that the decomposing moss and lichen combined with the dissolved minerals, that's what forms the basis of soil. So you don't have any other plants coming in until these pioneer plants have literally built the soil that they're going to grow in. Now, one very, very useful species of moss is called sphagnum moss or peat moss. These grow in bogs. I can Google basically a swamp. I mean, I go and find here something like that. Yeah, so that's what a bog looks like. They're usually very stinky, and they need to have these wooden walkways because you can't walk on this. You'll sink right in there, and it's basically all full of rotting organic material, like rotting plants. And a big part of that is this peat moss. So what do we use peat moss for? Well, this is what it looks like when it's alive, and then when it dies, we often use it for packing because it's super absorbent. So it helps to keep the roots of these plants moisturized while they're being shipped. And because they grow in these peat bogs where you have rotting material, when plants decay, they release methane, which is a really good fuel. So it's also used for fuel. Okay, the next phylum is called Hepatophyta. And again, if you look at the phonetic pronunciation, Hepatophyta. These are plants called liverworts. Like all of the other bryophytes, they grow in moist, shady areas. And again, they have leaf-like structures and stem-like structures, but they're not leaves and they're not stems because they don't have what? They don't have vascular tissue. So this is what the liverworts look like. Now you can see here this leaf-like structure I'm talking about. That's called the thalloid. And the official definition, a flat body with distinguishable upper and lower surfaces, basically a leaf-like structure. And the main function of that is to increase the absorption of water. And here's another picture where you can see the thalloids here, these flat green things. And in some species, you have these little umbrella type things that grow out that have the reproductive cells, AKA the spores, are in there. So the distinguishing characteristic, remember I told you there were going to be distinguishing characteristics for each group. For moss, I'm not really sure what that would be. I guess I would say maybe the sporophyte grows out from the gametophyte, and the fact that the entire group of plants are named after that one phylum, the bryophytes. For Hepatophyta, it's definitely going to be the thalloid. So Hepatophyta, thalloid. And finally, the last of the bryophytes, phylum Anthocerophyta. These are called hornworts, and you can see by the picture why they're called hornworts. Again, they live in moist, shady areas, and the distinguishing characteristic of the Anthocerophyta phylum is that it has a single large chloroplast in each cell instead of having many, many small chloroplasts. And this is one of the pieces of evidence that scientists use to say that that plants in general evolve from algae. Remember, we have algae and plants both share chlorophyll A and B. They both, I completely just blanked. What else? Oh, they store energy. They store energy as starch, and they use cellulose in their plant walls. Ha, there we go. So those three things. But Anthocerophyta specifically, they have a single large chloroplast, which is weird for plants. So those are the bryophytes.